This time on Backshed, we've got a 1975 KE30 two-door Corolla. Little bit left to centre for me, but I've got a soft spot for these. Let's take a look. So if you saw episode 18, the wrecking yard video, this was actually in that video. It was inside one of the sheds, not outside, but she's still showing signs of wear in the paint and in the dash. She's very complete, and probably the uncommon bit, she's two-door. Mandatory pile of junk in the passenger seat, and the dash is pulled apart a bit. Oh god. Please flip forward. You'd think they'd flip forward somehow, wouldn't you? I'm not sure if we can trust that statement. The other reason I bought this one is she's not rusted out. Got no rust in the sills. The doors are good. Really? Is that where we were going with this one? Well, there's the rest of the dash for there. Looks like we're in the middle of installing a bit of a boy racer pack here. Oh, yep, definitely were. That doesn't look very racy. She got a few marks on her, and that's not its original colour. There's evidence of a baby poo brown around the bonnet and doors. And she's pretty complete under here too. Second month, 75. KE30, and there's also its stamping there, KE30. The motor in these is called a 3K, and it's got a 4-speed manual. Like I said, she's pretty complete. Don't know what that's doing. Not sure what's going on there. And it's not really connected to anything. Don't know if I'll call them rat turds, maybe like a big mouse. But here's where there's something really going on under here. That is not the original carburetor. That's what's called an ADM34. That's off a much bigger engine, something like, we have something more like that, a 4.1 litre Falcon. I think they had them on the 3.3s as well. So a 250 cubic inch or a 200 cubic inch Falcon. But I'd say part of the old boy racer pack, done a little carby swap, and it doesn't really look like they ever finished. So I wonder if they had that disconnected for tank issues, or whether they actually never finished the carburetor swap. I guess we'll find out. It's got a little bit of fluid in the front, so we might have front brakes. and a cable clutch, which is good because cables tend to not seize up, as opposed to the master cylinder that we'd probably have to replace if it was hydraulic clutch. So we'll see if the clutch works in a minute. Now I know this engine rolls over because I actually tested that the day I bought it. It was shedded, so I was pretty confident it was going to be fine with no moisture in the motor, but I did just want to check, and it rolled over pretty good. So the first thing we'll probably do is chuck a battery in and see if some of that, or all of that mess, makes it catch fire. And there's a bit of shit going on here too. I haven't quite figured out if there's something missing from there or whether it was something added to there. Where are they going? Out through there. They don't look factory, and neither does that. I guess we'll figure that out. They're not actually connected to anything. Yeah, like I said, I'll chuck a battery in it, see if it catches fire. No battery clamp. Well, that's a good sign. There's no sparks as I connect it. Nothing's feeling warm just yet. So while that's deciding if anything's going to get hot, will start to burn, because there's a bit of a mess of aftermarket wiring inside there with all those gauges. I'm just wondering where they picked up their power from. It's over full, but being over full doesn't surprise me because of the carby swap. And like I say, that's a pretty big carburetor. That's off a, I'm not sure where they've actually got that carburetor, but that was standard on a 200 cubic inch or a 3.3, or a 250 cubic inch, which is the 4.1 litre Falcon engine. This is 1166 cc's, a 1200 cc, which is a 1.2. Seems a little excessive. So I wouldn't be surprised if they were trying to get it going. A lot of flooding, fuel into the oil, but we'll see. I guess we'll, oh, that's not even screwed down, so they probably never finished, because that gasket is brand new. Anyway, we'll worry about that in a minute. So it's got oil, it's not burning to the ground. I'll have a look inside and see if in there's catching fire. Well, there's no smoke billowing out. That's a good thing. That's a positive sign. They're all okay. All those fuses, none of them are. That's what sort of worries me there. They've just sort of picked up on power. That one's not insulated there. They've just sort of grabbed power wherever they could. That's those two wires. That's them there. They're not connected, which that's actually good, which means potentially none of that is getting power, which that might sound like a bad thing, but to me that's actually a good thing, because it means nothing's going to go up in flames. Oh, key's already on. We've got dash lights. I must have the key on to move it. It's hot. It's hot in here. That's awesome. They weren't having a great day in the welder by the look of that. So it shocks me that it fell off. I'll say that's a vent from somewhere. That goes there. together already. Oh good, eh? That's all the little knobs and a little taco. I wonder if that works. Well, that worries me. What's that off? Obviously they're in the middle of the Boy Racer pack and never finished, because that has, oh yeah, there's one screw hole there too. It doesn't look like it's ever been finished, and that is not staying because I think I want to bring that back. Factory console. Oh, one, I was going to say not broken, but there's one little crack there and there, and they've hacked that out, I'd say, for a stereo. But anyway, we'll use what we've got. We'll get that one back in. And the glove box lid, but there's no insert, but that's okay. I'll get that back together. Liar. I didn't even notice they were missing. And the fuel tank on these guys is behind there, which it kind of looks like somebody's had a bit of a reef at that and unfortunately torn it there and there. I might give it a wind on the key. Actually no, I won't. I will start with the fuel tank, because if that's got a heap of crap in it and by some strange reason that works, any crap will be brought up through that pump, and I don't really know if I want to either block those lines or clog that pump. So before I go winding on it, I might take a look in that tank. I'll get him up in front of the shed and we'll see what we can find in that tank, and then maybe start trying to crank on it. So we'll get a few things that we don't need in there that could potentially get broken out into a container, and we'll just clean him out, get the gear out of the boot, get it all in there, and then we'll start ripping him. Hang on. So I reckon I just figured out why I couldn't flip those seats forward, because there's the flip there. That's the driver's seat, hence the excess wear, and that's the passenger seat. Well, whatever. Oh yeah. Winning. I find that weird. The only spot that didn't have a mat is the place you use most. But then again, the driver's seat was in the passenger side. That is just classic. And that was in there too, so I wonder... Oh, really? I think that was their hanger bracket. Yeah, it's just hanging there. So I'd say they had it wired to up there. Actually, that one under there is not even connected either. Ooh, a little bit of an old rust repair. Other than that, she's pretty good. So we'll get this fella out, and he's pretty good in here. He's filthy. It's not rusty. And that little repair you could see from underneath, you can see they're welded in, but at least it's welded. A little drain hole that's bigger than it should be there. They went to a bit of trouble with the paint. They've even painted in the boot here. Not well, but they've painted in the boot. Because like I said, you can see that it was baby poo brown there and in the engine bay. A lot of tanks you come across, to actually see inside them, you've got to remove the tank, because the only way to look inside is to remove the sender or the pickup unit. But I'm going to get a bit cheeky on this one. I've got a couple of small block Chevys, because you can never have enough small block Chevys. And to use on them, rather than pulling them all down, I bought a little bore scope, and it's just a little camera with a light and a Wi-Fi head. And you just Wi-Fi it to your phone and you can check bores and that sort of thing. So the same principle I was going to use to check the bores on this guy to see if it needs to come apart, I'm going to use on the fuel tank. And now looking at the length of that, I don't even think I need to undo that filler neck. I think I might have enough to go down into the filler neck. But just on the small block Chevy idea, the first thing I think of when I see one of these little Corollas is engine swap. And being old school, this is exactly where my head was going, but we'll go one step at a time. And I've just got the phone there in the boot so we can see what's going on. And if you have a look there now, you see that's the filler neck as we go in. And then into the tank. That's the side of the tank. And that should be the bottom of the tank. And I don't see really anything I hate there, so I'll take that out. And there's no fuel in there, so I'll chuck some fuel in it and see where we go from there. So I'll chuck some fuel in it. That way when we start cranking on it, hopefully, well, it'll either try to suck something up or the pump won't work. At least we'll know where we're at. But that was remarkably clean. So I'd say in the carby swap, they probably ran it out of fuel, which might have helped. So now we've got fuel in it. If I start winding on it and it happens to pick up a bit of fuel, we'll have no junk coming. Actually, what I might do is I might change that filter first. Yeah, I might do that. I'll just change that filter, then we'll wind on it. And I'll stick a bottle up here just to see if I can catch the fuel, if we get any. I probably should blow compressed air back and just see, but that was pretty clean, so I think I'll just wing it. I'll sit there somewhere you can see it, well, somewhere I can see it from the cab. And I think we'll give it a wind. I'll just see if I can feel any air coming out. As the diaphragm opens and closes, there should be like air to a certain degree anyway. Yeah, I can feel something. It's still very strong though, but I guess probably wouldn't be that strong. But anyway, I'll give it one more go and then I might just blow some air back, because I didn't really see the end of the pickup in the tank. I only really saw the bottom of the tank, but you'd think if the pickup was blocked and dirty, the tank would be dirty. But right, I'll put some air up that line. I'll tell you one thing that does kind of worry me though, is that's winding over really fast, which I don't think these had a lot of compression from new, but the fact it's winding over so quickly and easily. Well, I wanted fuel and I got it. That hose is that old and crusty that these standard clamps like these just wouldn't clamp down. So when I actually got fuel, it started siphoning out, and you can see it's still leaking. So I pretty much have got fuel everywhere. But if I've got it everywhere, it means I got it, right? So we'll keep going. I'll wind on it again and see if this pump wants to suck anything up. I don't know if you can see it there, but that filter's half full now, so we're getting somewhere. Well, and the other thing to do is check the spark. I reckon I know how I'm going to check the spark. I'm going to let the fuel tell me if there's any spark. That would be no. Geez, she's got some vacuum leaks. We'll give it one more go. That would be a no to the spark. Okay, so I thought I'll give it one more crack. I'll cover a couple of these vacuum leaks, and if you see that guy there, he's really bad as well. But I was thinking, am I just not giving enough fuel? Is it still very lean? And so I thought I'll just do that, and I thought I'll cover all basics. And when the fuel leak was all over here going crazy, I've knocked the that's the coil lead, and I must have been fluffing around in there. I was going pretty hard trying to sort that leak, which incidentally is still bloody leaking. I might have to get a new piece of hose first. But yeah, I will try that again, just in case that coughs back through the carburetor, which is a long way away. But I might just fix that hose first, then we'll try it again, this time with a coil lead connected, because I was ripping and tearing in there pretty hard, and I've obviously just sort of out he came. But anyway, well, it's good not having to take plugs out, not yet anyway. And if I slow this bit of footage down, I can actually show you exactly when I unplugged it. It wasn't when I was fixing the leak, it's actually when I was showing you I fixed the leak. Anyhow, we'll get the fuel hooked up to the carby and move on. And you GM fans, stick around. 79 VB Commodore. It's a factory V8 car. It's coming up soon. So I go to push the hose on. Snapped it. So we'll get this guy out and see what I can't rig up as far as a fitting goes there. Actually, they're both going to come out, but I'll take them both out because that way I've got two chances of getting the correct thread. And if all else fails, I know where there's another fitting. There'd be another fitting right there. But at this point, I don't want to start pulling bits off that girl. I'll probably have to take her to town to get some fuel lines so I can stop that damn leak. So here's what I've come up with. That's the fitting. That's what came out. That's the section from in there. But check this out. I'd chuck all the extra fittings and odds and ends from Hollies and that sort of thing. That is actually a transmission cooler line from a cheap radiator that I bought. I've clearly already used one because there's only one in the bag, but you're not going to believe it. Not only does that thread fit, it's flared as well. So that and that will work just fine. Alright, let's see if I can't create a few more fuel leaks. There's lots going on here, lots. So why do I say there's lots going on here is I reckon there's another vacuum leak. This is definitely an unfinished carburetor swap because this is your throttle cable. But when you pull the throttle, watch here, that throttle's not opening properly. I wondered why it only had a tiny little bit of pedal, but that isn't stopping it from running. That's not an issue. So if I put some new vac line on a couple of these now, the problem is I'm not 100% sure what some of those bits do. So I don't know if I need them or not. So I just blocked them because they're clearly blocked now, but from that bracket, clearly whoever put this on maybe didn't have a great understanding of the carburetor either. Well, I didn't really want that to happen, but it did. That's a plug. That's not even a line. That wasn't vacuuming anything. There's no hole in it. Are you serious? It's just really small. And that tasted really bad. Like really bad. Vacuum leaks minimized. Stuck. It's been sitting for a long time. Could be stuck. This will either go really well or it'll leak fuel, backfire and burst into flames. Either way, job's done. I'm thinking one last try. Failing that, I think the float is stuck down. We're flooding. That's why we went from having spark and firing to now I've just got nothing. I think now it's just flooded. So if that is the case, I'll whip the carburetor off and we'll go through it. We'll do that. So that is the case. It's clearly flooding because I held my foot down on the accelerator to open the throttle plates and it started to fire. And how that works is if it's flooding, it's getting too much fuel, not enough air. The air-fuel ratio is all messed up. So by giving it more air, it sort of balances up the air-fuel ratio and it started to want to run. But as soon as you let your foot off the throttle, it dies. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to adjust the idle stop open a little bit and just see if I can get it to run. We'll see if we can make it run a little bit better. I just wanted to run better before I go ripping the carburetor off it, just in case I rebuild the carburetor and then find it's got a big end knock or something like that, or something worse, no oil pressure or whichever, which I had no dash lights. I did check then. But anyway, I'll open the throttle blades a little bit. If I can find the idle stop screw, that is. We'll see if that's enough. Wasn't quite enough. I'll adjust it up a little bit more. I'll just put a couple more turns in it and I'll go again. Right, so it's going to go. So I might pull a couple of plugs, give them a clean. I don't know why if that's why it's not running on all cylinders. It's running on about 2, or it could just be stuck valves. We've seen that before a million times, where the motor stops, the valve's open, little surface rust, doesn't allow it to shut properly, so it doesn't build compression. So for now, knock the plugs out, clean them off, see if we can get another cylinder in there, and then we'll go from there. But so I'll just leave that carby for now and we'll clean some plugs. The exhausts are all in the 40s except the back one at 66. Might have actually been running on 1 cylinder. It did sound like it was pretty low, but anyway, I'll get those plugs out. The other thing, and probably the more worrying thing, is, like I said, when I wound it over, it felt really easy to wind over. Not by hand. When I hit the key, it spun over really quick and easy, and that sounds like a good thing, but maybe it just has no compression. Maybe that's why it was parked halfway through that carburetor swap. We're definitely flooding. That plug is it's quite wet. It's clean, but it's pretty wet. What do you make of that one? I don't reckon that one was firing. That's been swimming, it's got that much fuel on it. So we're on the right track, we're flooding. So if it's going to keep flooding, what it'll do, it'll probably start, run okay, then get bad quick as it starts to flood, you know. So I'll clean all these plugs. It might start, it's probably the best it started, and then it'll fuel up and die. And that one's as dry as it's black and rich, like it's flooding, but it's not wet, so it doesn't have any oil on it. So the real wet ones are probably a little bit of oil. That's the cylinder that apparently was firing if you go off the exhaust manifold temp, and that was the blackest, driest one yet. So that's all fuel, I'd say. Hope the other ones aren't ring stuck. How much would that have disappointed whoever did the carburetor swap? They get it running, go tearing around, and the throttle stops with only a quarter throttle and it goes worse than it did from the original carby. Would have been a shattering moment. But so we'll see if my theory is correct. Plugs are clean, so they should fire. but what I think it'll do is run really good for a second, then die in the arse really quick. So we'll see. I don't think you got the memo about running really good first, then dying in the arse. You just went straight to the dying in the arse. The problem with trying to pick up on the back end of their carburetor swap, if I rebuild that carburetor, it's a rebuilt carburetor. Doesn't mean it was ever the right size for this motor though. Check those temps of the cylinders, see if we had one more. '83, 56, 44. So number one's just absolutely not running. And the other two, maybe one of them is, and that's picking up the temp of those middle manifold ports are joined, so you can't tell which one is and which one isn't. So I'd say we've got 2 cylinders. But that's okay. That's fine. 2's enough for now. Alright, so that's enough dicking about. It's obviously going to run. We'll get the carburetor off, get it freshened up, and see where it goes from there. Just lifted that carburetor off. I've still got the throttle cable and the fuel line to get off, but how accurate do you reckon I was with the flooding? Spared you the detailed rebuilding of the carburetor, and it's all back together now because I actually don't have much faith in this. I've picked up on the end of a carburetor conversion, and you can sort of tell it had never really run from the throttle linkage hitting on the cable bracket. You couldn't actually open the throttle, maybe a quarter open, and all the vacuum lines looped here and there, and I still think there's too many variables there to 100% think this is going to work. On one side of the argument, I don't even know if the engine's any good and we're trying to swap a carburetor. But on the other side of that coin, you go, well, you're not going to try and do a carburetor conversion to obviously a bigger carburetor to try and get more performance on an engine that's got a big end knock or something like that. But you never know. So I'm sort of thinking the engine's fine. I put my thumb over the plug hole on every cylinder and wound it, and it had reasonable compression, so the rings are fine. The valves are now not stuck, so I think it's really coming down to fuel and spark. So I'm going to give this one chance. I'm going to chuck it on. If it doesn't run or it doesn't idle, I might use the time then to order a reproduction original style carburetor and move on to the paintwork. Anyway, we'll stop talking. I'll chuck this on, see if it runs. If not, run to the paint. Alright, so I've sort of half-assed chucked it back on. I haven't got the throttle cable hooked up. Confidence is low. Plugs are back in. I did give the points a little sand because I had a real weak spark at some of the cylinders, but I mean, sometimes testing them on the side of distributor somewhere on metal, not that accurate. So it was spark, it was just weak looking, so we'll turn the key. I'll put a bit of fuel down the carburetor just through that vent tube, which will fill the bowl, and we'll see what goes on. I've got the throttle stop screw set quite high, so if it starts to run, it should idle quite high. But I kind of wanted to idle a bit high, get some heat in it, see if I've got all 4 cylinders, and go from there. Anyway, here we go. A little bit of fuel. Where's that? That's the accelerator pump. So a little bit of fuel, and we'll give it a hit. Well, it's running, but it still sounds like it's on 3, or you can tell it's on 3 because it's shaking really bad. But that's the oil pressure gauge line, and it's filled up with oil straight away. Check this out. Because that gauge is mechanical, not electric, that means even without power to that, it's showing that there's oil pressure. Not a lot, but there's probably a lot of fuel in that as well. So I might idle it down a little bit. No, nothing else is working, but that's okay. I'll just idle it down a fraction. I'll just bring it down with only that low oil pressure, although it's 20 psi idle, high idle, and I'll just see if that cylinder wants to improve. I'm going to run it any longer, I better put some water in it. It's got a little bit, but not enough. I can already see it leaking out the back. Might just pull that cylinder 1 plug again too. Just have a little, ironically, that was the one that looked like it had strong spark. And the others looked like they had weak spark. Oh, it's just running out the back. Just pouring out. It's only a hose. It's not running out. It is fucking out. So I'll have to just cut that off. So as fast as I'm putting it in the radiator, it is just running out that hose there. Anyway, it's only a hose. I'll give it a bit more of a run. And this should be really easy to do now that it's ridiculously hot. Borderline of boiling. But you know, it wouldn't be an episode without burning myself on something. It's actually not that hot. I jumped the gun. Although the way it's sizzling on that header, it says it is. This is going to be so temporary, like forever temporary. Well, there's no denying cylinder 1 is not working at all, or very poorly. It's not tapping, so it's not a lifter. You wouldn't think it's a stuck valve unless it's, I might have thought it was a stuck valve, but it's not ticking, so it's not stuck bad, but that's not uncommon. So here's my main issue. I want to just keep running it, but the oil pressure is dropping. Not fast, but it is just dropping lower and lower. And I don't think that's as detrimental as it might sound. I actually think all that is if you remember, it was really over full and it stunk of fuel. So I would say it's just that diluted with fuel, that now that the engine's starting to warm up, it's thinning the oil, which is increasingly thin because of fuel. And so now we're really dropping oil pressure. So next thing, I'll get that oil out and then see if we can't run it for a little bit longer and see if we can heat cycle that valve through. So I knew that oil was thin, but that would have to be the worst oil change I've ever done. That didn't just run out like warm oil, that gushed out like you were pouring petrol out of a drum, and it's everywhere. So we'll get some fresh oil in it, maybe clean up my mess. With oil and filter done, and I've just got him idling over there again. Look at the difference in that. 60 pound at idle. New filter, new oil. It's getting late in the afternoon. We might move on just to get some more achieved. I'll start buffing. We're not going to do anything elaborate with the paint. I'm literally just going to polish up what's there and leave it. So we'll get into that before it gets too late. So as I mentioned before, she's a little bit gone to make it good, but it's not exactly survivor paintwork or anything like that. It's been changed, so it's sort of in between. It's been resprayed in acrylic lacquer, but I'm not going to sand on it. It's not oxidized enough to need sanding. We're just going to work with what's there and just buff over these sunburnt bits and just see how it comes up. I'm not using anything elaborate. It's just a variable speed buff and an orange foam buff pad for Reckler G3 compound. You can use that on acrylic or 2-pack, and in the spray bottle it's just water. As you're buffing, you're creating a bit of heat, so it starts to dry off. You just give them a squirt with the water and keep going. It also allows your compound to go further, so you're not using a ton of compound. Just by keeping the pad moist, you can get a lot more surface area out of a small amount of compound. Now, normally when I'm buffing, I'll tape around the edges of the chrome and that sort of thing. But there's not a lot on this guy. There's only a little bit around the roof there. So I'll stop talking, I'll rip in, we'll get him buffed up. So I'm going to throw in a little disclaimer. I just started up here and there's a massive buff burn. Let it be known, they are not mine, but unfortunately they are everywhere. What that is acrylic lacquer. It's a thermoplastic, means it softens with heat, and so as you're buffing it, you're heating it and it softens, and when it gets too soft, that's what happens. It shifts, and if you can see the sort of scratching there, that's actually the grain of the buff pad, like one of these big old nasty wool pads. And as it's spinning, you can see it spins and it pushes all the paintwork down. It burns it, rips the top, and you can see how there's a build up at the bottom. It's kind of why I use the foam pad. They just don't heat up as quick. These guys, if you don't know what you're doing, they can get out of hand really quickly like that. So this sticker got the better of me. I just thought I'd take the sticker off the back there with a razor blade, but look, it's the sticker. Keeps on giving. The sun has actually faded the tint so much so that although the sticker's gone, it remains. So it's all washed down, and I'm going to drive it back onto the concrete. It's obviously running, so I thought I'll just drive it rather than push it, and it is running like a busted ass. So I'm going to go a little bit deeper. I think there's got to be more to it, because it has spark, it's got a ton of fuel, and it's definitely got enough compression to blow your thumb off the plug hole. So mate, if it's got those three elements, it should be running better than that. So we'll go a little bit deeper. This is about the point where we start checking absolute basics. I think it's got enough compression. It's definitely got fuel, and it's got spark. So if it's got air, fuel, and spark, it can only be one reason why we still don't have that cylinder and why it's running so bad, and that is either firing order or timing. And I don't mean timing as in advance at idle or total timing. I mean it's just firing at the wrong time due to firing order. And I don't actually know the firing order of these little Corollas. So what I'll do, I'll knock the cover back off, and that way I can see when the valves move, when they overlap, which cylinder's firing next, and I can confirm firing order that way. Some of them have it written on the manifold, which I haven't checked. A lot of V8 stuff's just got it on the intake manifold, which that has nothing on it. So I'll knock the cover off, I'll see what sequence it fires, see if I can find a timing mark on the balancer. We'll go from there. We'll just make sure the firing order is right and that the timing's set up correctly. So with the cover off, we're going to find every intake valve, and we're going to watch the intake valves to determine the firing order. And yeah, I could Google it, but let's just assume Google doesn't exist. So your intake runner is here. So that's going to be your intake valve. So that's cylinder number one, always starting at the front, cylinder number one, and working to the back. So there's another intake runner there. So that's another intake valve. Intake runner, intake valve. And I'm marking them just so that when you're watching the intake valves, intake runner, no one there. So when you're watching the intake valves as you're rolling it over, just so your eye doesn't get caught by mistake on one of the exhausts and you're watching the wrong valve. So if you see here, the exhaust port leads to there, and it'll be the same. The two inside exhaust manifold are there and there, so it'll be these two that are exhaust ports, and the one at the back there. So intake, 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 intake. So we're going to watch these intakes. We're going to roll the motor over, and every time an intake valve opens, you'll know that cylinder is taking air in. The next time it comes up, that's when it compresses, so it would fire. So roll him over, and as you're rolling the motor over, you're watching for the intake valve to open. Okay, so you can't see from there, but the exhaust is closing and the intake is opening. So that's literally meaning the exhaust gas has been pushed out, exhaust valve is shutting, and then the intake valve is opening. So that's actually right where I had it. It's actually wanting to fire cylinder one, or it's actually leading up to firing cylinder one. The problem is I can't see a timing mark. Anyway, so we'll just keep rolling. So that's with cylinder number one intake valve closed. So that means the pistons travel down with the valve open, took the air in. It'll now be ready to come up. And this is how we'll find, I guess, top dead center on number one. So we should be able to find a timing mark then. And then we'll go through what else, which way it fires. I mean, I could Google it, but let's assume Google didn't exist. This is the way you can't get it wrong, by checking what intake valve opens next. So we should be coming onto it, and a timing mark here somewhere. I'll knock that plug out. just so I can check the piston is at the top of the top of its stroke. Because now that valve's shut, you can't tell where it is in its travel. I'll just get a zip tie. And if you sit something soft like a zip tie down on top of the piston, you'll actually be able to see as the piston rises, it'll push the zip tie out. With the zip tie just sitting in the cylinder like that, and you're rolling the motor over, you can actually see the zip tie rise as it gets to the top and then drop as it starts to sink. That's basically at the top of its stroke there now with intake shut. So that should be firing cylinder 1, which means if I pop that cap, the rotor button should be pointing here. And if it's not, then we know we have an issue. And it's nowhere near, it's way over there. That's in between. That's not even facing a cylinder. Oh, it's almost facing at 3. But that's definitely should be firing number 1. So there is absolutely an issue here with timing somewhere. I'll just put a mark on the balancer. So there's your timing indicator there, and it's got 20, 10, 0. Just there. But there's nothing on that balancer I can see. So what could have happened is that balancer could have slipped, or well, there's something there and I just can't see it. What's that there? There's a mark there, I think. It's a mile out though. So I'll mark on that balancer where I believe top dead center is, and that's right there. If you can get in there. You made a mess of that. Because I think I can see a mark down further, but that's nowhere. It's way down here. It's way down there near the top of that pen. Anyway, I'll keep rolling him over now until we find out which valve moves next. So that one, so whichever one of these valves moves next, that's the next cylinder firing. So that's with our intake open. So as that shuts, I'll keep rolling it over, and you watch the intake valves. Whichever intake opens next, that's obviously the next cylinder taking air in. So if I roll him, there's our cylinder 1 shutting. So whatever intake valve opens next, and if you see number 3 there, intake valve, he's cracked. So the firing order finishes 1, it's taking in 3 next. So 1, 3, and we'll keep going and look for the next valve, and I'm going to take a guess and say it'll be 4. Well, I can tell you it already is, because number 4 exhaust is dropping. So when it closes, and there goes number 4 valve down. So it's 1, 3, 4, and obviously it's going to be 2 after that. But we'll keep rolling him over. Oh, well, I said keep rolling him over. Keep rolling over, son of a bitch. Oh, it gets tight there. Here comes 4, intake valve up, and there goes 2. So it's 1, 3, 4, 2. So with that wound over to what I'm calling top dead center, my top dead center, if I put the cap back on, that's essentially, you see the rotor buttons facing this way to here, but that's cylinder 3. And I've got our firing order as 1, 3, 4, 2 written here. 1, 4, 2, 3. So doesn't matter how many times I say it, it's clearly wrong. So if I undo all them, I'll come out. And if I forget all about that and just use so cylinder 1, we're going to go to there, that's where the rotor button was facing. Cylinder 3 is our next one firing. Cylinder 4, and yes, I've got to keep looking at the firing order because I've got a shit memory. So cylinder 4, cylinder 2. So we've now got 1 over here. So where's my pen? There. So that's now cylinder 1. That's 3. Looks like a kindergarten kid wrote that. That's 4. And 2. Righto. Now I haven't moved the distributor. I'm assuming because my timing mark, not the one on the balancer, it's that far wrong. So now with that as cylinder 1, I haven't changed the body. I've just put them in the correct order because at top dead center, it was literally pointing at that post. So I'm just going to use that as cylinder 1. Let's see if it runs. I've got my throttle cable disconnected, so I'll give him a pump by hand. What do you know? 4 cylinders. But before I cover my engine bay and oil again, I'll get this cover back on. So hindsight's a wonderful thing, and it's easy to go, well, why didn't you check the firing order first? Well, that's easy. It didn't give me any symptoms that firing order was wrong. And let's face it, even if the firing order was right, with that carby flooding the way it was, that's why we only had 1 cylinder running. It was just flooding so bad. And then after the carburetor was rebuilt, you see it idle pretty happily on 3. And I can expand on that a little too as to why it was running happily on 3 at idle. Is now that I've got the firing order back, 4 and 2 are actually in the same spot on the distributor. The timing was so far out, by the time they lined up the timing mark, it was actually past cylinder 1, ready to fire cylinder 3. And the order that they had, 4 and 2 were in the same spot with both firing orders. It was just cylinder 1 and 3 spark leads were actually the wrong way around. And so 4 and 2 were firing and 3 was firing at idle because it was actually getting cylinder 1 spark, but really early in its cycle. At idle, an engine's not as sensitive to timing, but like I said, after I washed it and tried to drive it back onto the concrete, that's when it started to miss and carry on, go back to 2 cylinders and that sort of thing, and you know something's not right. That was a strange one because firing order will generally give you some really distinct symptoms like backfiring through the carburetor and out the exhaust. It's firing at the incorrect time. So you find just as a valve opens, whether it be an intake or exhaust or something, the cylinder pressure is escaping. But I can actually explain that a little as well. Cylinder 1, when it was getting spark, which was actually cylinder 3 spark, it was traveling down in the bore. So it's trying to take air in when it got spark. Nothing was happening. And that's why it was just dead, no backfiring. But anyway, you learn something new every day. Incorrect firing order with bugger all symptoms. So with the cover back on, but she lives to fight another day. Righto. We better get into that interior. So, first thing in the morning, I want to get into the inside of that thing and start getting those gauges out. Not the oil pressure, it can stay, but those other gauges, I'm going to flick them, put the factory console back in and just start cleaning up that center console, get all the dash back together, clean the trims up and that sort of thing. It's good to get that motor to run, but like I say, the first thing I think of with these little cars is engine swap. Being old school, I like the idea of a small block Chevy or a small block Windsor Ford, but Australian guidelines make that pretty tough these days. You'd have to go back to a really small capacity like a 283 small block Chevy or a 289 Windsor Ford. And I'm sure there's a dozen really good small capacity turbo motors like 2 litres, 1.8. I'm not really that clued up on modern 4-cylinder turbo engine swaps. If you are, bang it in the comments. What's the best swap for these things? I don't know. And as far as buffing the paint, it came up okay. I didn't expect too much from it, and that's pretty much what I got. A little bit of gloss on the side. The top, I don't know if I'll call it patina. It's weathered, but not being the original paint. It's not really what I'd call survivor or patina paint. It's just old paint. And like I say, I do have a little soft spot for these things. I had the use of one of these my uncle and auntie gave me when I was about 13 or 14. And every morning before school, I'd drive it from our farm down the paddock to the bus stop, which is about 1.5 km. So for the last 2 years of my schooling life, that was probably the only reason I had reasonable attendance, is I got to drive to the bus stop and home again. Anyhow, I'll see you in the morning. First thing this morning, it's time to get some of this cleaned up. Blow a bit of the dust out, get rid of them, and then start working through all this. Sort some wiring out, get that factory console back in, just generally clean him up. I like the fact that it's still got its factory radio. And that's not hacked out, but they've hacked out a section there, which I don't really know what I can do there, but we'll get all this tidied up and work it out from there. Alright, let's stop talking. So we're dusted off and I've run the vacuum through. Time to start removing some shit. And I'm gonna start with these. Every time I look at them, a little tiny piece of me dies. So they're first to come out. That's ridiculous. I just want to start going through this wiring. And I must say, a little bit disappointed that they took the pads off them, but anyway, I'd prefer that than what I had there. And anything that's not connected, such as this fella here, that's obviously a stereo that they had up there where they cut that hole out. But I'm just going to take it all out, all except for that oil pressure gauge. He can stay, he's kind of useful, but there's no use me having a water temp or a voltmeter, because it's actually got a temp gauge and a charge light. And find out what's going on there. That's probably a console light or something. Those wires are already, they're in the engine bay going to nothing, so I can get them out and just generally start cleaning this up. This is all speaker wire here. I get that, so we'll start undoing these guys, start stripping to get this out. Can't make this shit up. What the hell? You can just see the thought process behind that. It's like, well, I need an earth. It's only going to be that long, but I've got no wire. So I'll just solder 3 connectors together. Oh, I need another one on that side, so I'll do it again on the other side. Wow. And this has got to come off. If ever you start to feel the need to put something like this in your car, walk away. Get yourself together, because you're having a moment. So that's pretty much the dash all back together, except for one thing. Now I looked long and hard for one of these, and I finally found one. I did end up modifying that bracket. By modifying it, I mean cutting it off. It doesn't need a choke. So now at least we can get full throttle. There's probably still plenty I could do to this little fella, but for now, it's running and driving. So there's only really one thing I want to do now, and that's probably relive my 13 or 14-year-old childhood of driving my Corolla from the house down a dirt track to the bus stop every day. So let's do that. That is running a mile better. Marvellous what happens when you've got the right firing order and timing. A million % better. Where's the thing? Oh, there. Oh, get it right, son. Cover off. And my shadow in the way, you idiot. What's the word? I can't think of the word. I'll unplug all of them. Do that again because the iPad did that. What is it? GoPro. The case. That's a plastic grill. I don't know why I tried to sit on that, but never mind. The only little toy I bought. That's the that exhaust would make that noise. That's the noise it would make. I wonder if what's the phone taking the place of the compressor these days? I just had it and I forgot it. I had it, then I forgot it. What was the word? Sensitive. So it's beer time, and that's it for another one. That was my childhood walk down memory lane with my little Corolla. But do stick around. There's heaps of new stuff coming. So I'll see you next time, and thanks for watching.